everyone, welcome or welcome back. If you don't know me, my name is Catherine, and just as a warning, this might be a little bit of a long one, a little bit of an inflammatory one. I don't expect you to agree with everything I say, but this is, after all, an opinion autopsy. So without further ado, let's begin. So here is the thing, and here is my bone to pick. We keep, in my personal opinion, discussing male-affected crises as if they emerged from a vacuum of patriarchy. As though patriarchy is the sole causal agent, endlessly proliferative and ultimately sufficient as an explanatory endpoint. That presumption does not hold contact with systems theory. It actually presumes something naively unstable, that half the population can completely disengage from the other half emotionally, intellectually, sexually, relationally, and that nothing downstream will fracture. And when I speak about disengagement, you guys, I hope you can appreciate that I'm speaking about, selective avoidance on all fronts. There are men who starve their relational familiarity with the opposite sex in favor of staying locked in at the gym, focused on their career, whatever it happens to be, but they do manage to keep their sexual appetites more than satisfied. And the thing is, we do live in an age where you can maintain that. The online era, if you can sort of catch my drift, provides indiscriminate access to that. And there are undoubtedly women who have tried to decenter masculine relevance from their lives, only to, unfortunately, and to their frustration, only to find something else equally as unhealthy to fill the gap for that relational substitution, for that relational lack. And somehow, some way, these substitutions, right, these relational substitutions do end up orbiting some male referent in order to sustain themselves. My point is, we can't escape each other. We live in a relational ecosystem, and a system requires distinct and opposing entities to interact. You'll probably make yourself sick, honestly, trying to make less urgent, less relevant the opposite sex's significance and their fears. What's worse, honestly, is that at any given point in time, someone is feeling more existentially under siege than the other. And under our aggressive compensatory grievance frameworks, someone is either asking too much or giving too little, and everyone suffers for it. Especially when it comes to this particular discussion, the liberal end watching the more moderate end sympathize to crises that they do not fundamentally believe in. Conservative dilemmas, male salient existential anxieties, conspiracies, for example, the male loneliness epidemic, or actually more so friendlessness epidemic, the perceived delegitimization of male anger and male dissatisfaction, anxiety concerning declining birth rates, fear of genetic and relational obsolescence. This is essentially just the anxiety that one's labor, that one's lineage, that one's sacrifice will have no long-term imprint. The claim that men no longer possess a culturally acceptable language for grievance. The idea, essentially, that men cannot complain. These, you guys, are not fringe hallucinations, at least in my personal estimations. These are interpretive frameworks through which men are actively attempting to understand what some may interpret to be a decreasing experience of significance as it concerns relational, sexual, and civic significance.
So I know no one's really talking about this at the moment, but I just had this thought come to me about the whole male loneliness epidemic. And it just hit me while I was at gym now, like the whole movement kind of falls apart when you start wondering about the solutions. Like, what do you want society to do about this? Do you want us to just collectively pull money together, everyone who's in a relationship, pull money together so you guys can have like a communal prostitution fund? Or like, would you like some sort of legislation that makes it mandatory that everyone must have a partner of sorts? Like, I might be horribly wrong here, but I feel like everything just falls apart once you start thinking of what you actually want society to do about this. Like, what must we do? How is it on society to make you more desirable to a mate or a potential partner? But please educate me where I'm wrong.
Recently, and what inspired me essentially to want to make this video in the first place, Stephen Bartlett hosted a conversation with Dr. K, and the video the episodes, actually, he filmed 2, have recently gone viral on TikTok. Even though the discussions in particular were had quite a while ago, he seems to be catching a lot of response, a lot of backlash, a lot of reaction, not necessarily for his endorsement of what some might interpret to be radicalism, but his restraint in condemning what people interpret to be radicalism.
Is anyone else starting to feel like Diary of a CEO is just intellectual red pill content? Because what do you mean we have to intervene in the men not passing their genes on? What does intervention into the men needing to pass their genes down look like?
This Diary of a CEO nonsense is so much worse than I expected. I saw a few clips on TikTok and I was like, what in the Gilead is going on here? And now I'm watching more of the conversation on YouTube and it's even worse.
I realize a lot has already been said about this interview, but I think there's one more clip that's worth watching and discussing, so let's do that together.
That affects our lives that we have no control over. For example, because of the dating and mating crisis, we no longer have sexual connections, emotional connections, and there's a part of the brain that is getting starved because sex is so important. So there's something missing in our lives, and that's what is necessary for addiction to grow. And this is creating huge problems because...
So this is very much the alt-right pipeline. And the reason I know that is because I'm very familiar with church culture, very specifically fundamentalist church culture and the way that these people think. And let me just tell you, they're the same picture. Everything that this man said is something that I have heard in the church.
And I can completely understand, especially so if you're living in the States, the political climate is quite fragile for some, unbearable, quite frankly, for others. And so if you don't know who Stephen Bartlett is, he is the host of the Diary of a CEO podcast. He is, by every metric, an economically successful man. He's recently engaged. He seems publicly stable. He's generally quite likable. Obviously, I think you have to be that way to be an effective interviewer. Anyway, he was accused by critics of lending legitimacy to what people loosely termed as pseudo-conservative male grievance. And he, alongside figures like Chris Williamson, is now framed as a gateway for reactionary ideas, or at the very least, and when I use the word radicalism, when I use the terms radicalism, reactionary, guys, just know that in this particular video, I am referring to the conservative end of the spectrum. And not because he explicitly, like in your face, endorsed, far-right sympathies to conservatism, but rather because you could sense that he refused to moralize expressions of male dissatisfaction, sometimes of male anger, out of urgent legitimacy, at least compared to the urgency of other postmodern contentions.
This is super scary. 50% of men who kill themselves have no history or evidence of mental illness. What causes people to kill themselves is they try to connect with others and they get rejected. I can feel the hurt. I can feel the loss.
Dr. Alok Panogia.
He's a psychiatrist, Harvard Medical School instructor,
Real-life monk
who uses his own addictive past
to help millions of people improve their own mental health.
Everyone is getting screwed, but there's a crisis with men. People telling us that being a man means that you're toxic, that there's a patriarchy, that your testosterone level makes you violent. So men are struggling right now, and the rest of the world says, no, you're not. You're privileged. And these people have been literally killing themselves because no one has been listening to them. Except there's one group of people who says your life sucks. And that's these toxic masculine people. And these guys say, I will show you a way to make it better. And that's when things go bad.
What we're seeing here, in my opinion, is actually very, very fascinating. And appreciate that I'm actually using the whole conversation, the whole controversy around Bartlett as an entry route to a broader conversation, a broader discussion I did see taking place on TikTok, particularly as it concerns this idea of the left behind male child. What becomes of him? Will he survive? Does he have significance in the modern zeitgeist? In my personal estimation, the male child estranged from intellectual competence, from relational significance to women, and from coherent self-valuation has no socially sanctioned landing zone. There is seemingly no favorable ending point. Honestly, I wish I were exaggerating, you guys, but the truth is the pathways are brutally consistent across datasets: addiction, ideological radicalization, misogynistic violence, and perhaps the most terrifying to contemporary liberal temperaments, conservatism. So the question is not whether or not these trajectories exist. Okay, the subject of this very conversation, this very investigation, is these trajectories. The question is, how do we effectively interrogate them? The question, well, for me on a personal level, is what is it that you are actually afraid of? And I know, guys, I know not everyone is going to like what I have to say, but I do trust that we are all adults, that we can all have mature conversations. And, if you've watched my previous videos, if you're subscribed to my channel, I think it's very, very obvious that I'm not dissembling about the fact that, guys, I probably lean more conservative than I do liberal, although obviously there are controversial exceptions that antagonize me, quite frankly, to both sides. So I find that I can never, truly find a home, and I think that's the experience of most people. Otherwise, without further ado, you know what you're getting into. You clicked on the video. Let's begin. Let me actually anchor us somewhere uncomfortable, just to set the tone for what to expect from this video. So the general allege that men who fall behind intellectually, economically, and in socio-relational relevance are sympathized towards radicalism is not novel nor speculative. It is actually more than consonant with a long tradition in sociology and relational psychology. But is it actually true? One can find versions of this claim in Durkheim's work on anime, in Merton's strain theory, in contemporary analysis of status threat and identity foreclosure. We can study these across multiple data sets. I'm actually curious to know, genuinely, from some of you, do you find that your more liberally minded male peers tend to be more educated, enlightened, philosophized, if you will? Do you find that they are more emotionally regulated, intellectually robust? I don't know. This is just I'm honestly just curious.
The boy child is falling behind, and it might lead to the Third World War. Let's get into this. I've been a tutor for several years. I've tutored kids, and this is what I've noticed. When you speak to the girl child, there's sort of an incremental thinking that happens in their minds. You will ask them naturally, so what do you want to do when you grow up? What do you want to study? They'll tell you, I want to study medicine, I want to study law, I want to study accounting, I want to study education, I want to study whatever. And even though because they're kids, they don't have a step 1, step 2, step 3 approach, but the girl child will say step 1, step 3, step 5. Like they will think, there's still gaps in their logic, but the gaps in their logic are because they're kids. For example, they will say, I want to study medicine, but they will tell you, I'm not quite sure how to get an 80% in math, right? I'm currently getting 50s. I think I'm going to study, but I'm not sure how I'm going to study in order to get that 70% or that 80%. But the difference is they know what the goal is. They know how to get there. They might have gaps. But when you talk to the boy child, they will tell you, I want to be a billionaire from a trick. And then you think, my goodness, you went from step 1 to step 100. Who's going to fill in the next 98 steps? Because it's not even realistic. But the issue with the boy child is that they don't even understand that it's not realistic. It's when you start questioning them and say, okay, you're going to be billionaire. How are you going to make your first 100,000? That they say, oh.
What is it like to be a man in today's day and age? How do you feel about yourself? How does it feel knowing that 70 to 80% of women want you to make more money than them, and yet 60% of people who graduate from college are women? So men are living in a world today where there are impossible expectations to meet. And so, what is it like to be someone who fundamentally has no chance at success?
I don't think about that. Let's bring some statistics into this. In 2024, more than 800,000 learners sat down for the NSC, right? Metric NSC. Of those, it is reported that 72,000 more girls passed the NSC than boys. From the years 2021 to 2023, a cumulative 200,000 plus girls passed the NSC more than boys. Of those 200,000, 124,000 plus got a bachelor's admission. That is telling us the boy child is falling behind at a matric level. Then let's bring it lower. There was a study done with 57 countries for grade 4 literacy rates. 57 countries participated. And of those 57, 52 countries, the girl child was excelling far beyond the boy child. Already at a grade 4 level, the boy child is not catching on. So what normally happens when the boy child is left behind? What happens is the boy child that is left behind tends to go into politics. This is an observation I've made. They may not go and join a political party. They may not go and run to be the next mayor, but they will lead political conversations. They will start podcasts where they talk about cultural and political conversations. And when that happens, countries or societies tend to lean right wing, because when they lean right wing, it will balance this incompatibility. Because if the girl child at grade 4 already is doing so much better than the boy child, who is this girl child going to marry one day? Because now women don't need men for a bank account, a house, a car, anything, So these women are not going to choose to marry these men that are falling behind. So the men that fall behind and are unable to catch up will drive the political conversation. Because once they drive political conversations, they can get these women that are doing better than them to feel bad and abandon their intellectual activities.
Alright, so the first thing I want to explicitly address is literacy, because it is in fact in measurable decline as it concerns men. And the reason I personally believe that it is so crucial is because a human being's capacity to articulate their grievance, dissatisfaction, need, desire, legitimate or otherwise in your eyes, defines how or if that human being will survive when other human beings within this relational space bear witness to some account of their pain, to some account of their grievance, of their dissatisfaction. Remember, when it comes to relational wars, perception matters. And I personally am not so intimidated or disturbed by the expression of male anger as I am what is actively done with it. I'm much more interested in how that emotional expression is engaged with, however volatile or passive it happens to be. I am far more interested in whether or not or how that emotional expression is metabolized through discharge, through force, through withdrawal, or through fantasy. Literacy, properly understood, again, completely my opinion, it's not a cosmetic skill. It's actually an emotional discipline. It actually reflects one's maturity. It requires patience. And by literacy, I don't merely mean functional learning, reading ability. I mean rhetorical patience. I mean symbolic fluency. I am referring to the disciplined articulation of inner states. And the erosion of these capacities, again, in my opinion, correlates strongly with emotional volatility, ideological extremism, and an outright collapse in dialogical endurance. In short, when men lose language, when men lose rational mediums of expression, they don't become silent when they are misunderstood. They actually become reactive. Historically, we appreciate that literacy actually served as three, I've condensed them to three, although I'm sure that we can definitely come up with more. But for the purposes of this video, literacy served as three stabilizing functions for men. First, temporal patience. Writing letters, reading extended texts, formulating arguments. These practices required sustained attention across time. You cannot meaningfully or threateningly rage at the same time as conjugating a sentence with grammatical precision, okay? It's not that it's impossible, but it is definitely harder. Language slows impulse, you see what I'm saying? It forces delay. Second, symbolic mediation. Language and literacy allows for, volatile emotions to be expressed, represented through a physical medium rather than outrightly discharged. The person is not vomiting all over you to the point that your physical person is threatened. Third, self-observation. You guys, writing causes one to hear oneself. As you are actively doing it, you hear your own excesses, your own contradictions, your own incoherences, and you witness them, you battle against them right there on the page. You can, you really, you come face to face with your own nonsense sometimes, but sometimes you need it. You need to be able to rationalize with your own irrationalities, if that makes sense. The beauty of literacy is that it allows one to externalize the self just enough to permit reflection without complete annihilation. I think it's obvious, guys. I love writing. I'll never stop talking about how I feel that, writing, it's such, and I mean writing of all forms, it's such a diminishing art. But anyway, sorry, moving on. So courtship likewise occurred through letters, through writings, through poetry, the slow disclosure of interiority. Men and women were required to sit with ambiguity. Men were required to attend to another mind. They were required to formulate their thoughts before, overt expression. And so what we see is that attraction was mediated through that patience. And when this infrastructure collapsed, I think that attraction was reduced to cruder proxies, dominance, shock, confidence stimulation. And women, rightly, I think, began to notice the tragic absence of what I call intellectual hospitality. What we're responding to as women a lot of the time, and this obviously, guys, is not consistent for all men, but I do find whenever I'm debating certain types of men, not all men, but I'm not going to lie and say I have not encountered this when I have. What we're responding to a lot of the time is not articulation from your end per se, but the capacity to hold another person's world without immediately trying to correct it, to collapse it, or to contradict it. That is literacy as relational competence. But here is where I actually want to complicate the narrative. It is really obvious, at least to me, that figures like Dr. K, and not the more overtly performative manosphere influencers, but rather the so-called pseudo-intellectual experts, are indeed categorically intelligent. They are literate. Many of them possess advanced degrees. They have academic receipts to prove where they are, why they are being given the platform that they are being given. And so you see, these receipts do matter, which tells me that the conservative drift that we are influencing cannot merely be reduced to a lack of intellectual aptitude, to a deficit in intelligence or formal education, to a lack of literacy. You know, that explanation fails on contact. The gravitational pull towards conservatism, towards grievance politics, towards reactionary frameworks is not primarily cognitive. It is actually, in my opinion, affective. It runs through deeper dissatisfactions, deeper angers, deeper contempts, and critically, the way men are permitted to or otherwise relate to those, those fragile internal states. And the connection back to literacy is this: when anger and evident dissatisfaction lose a rational language of expression, when there is no adequate processing medium, they seek anesthetics. And we see this most clearly in two domains: rage and sexual desire. Whether you like it or not, there are dissatisfactions, desires, and needs within men that are volatile and alive. They do need to be attended to, and it is both dishonest and dangerous, in my opinion, to dismiss all expressions of male dissatisfaction as inherently threatening. But it is equally mistaken to assume that women are responsible for regulating those forces. That's not my job. I'm sorry. That is not our role. Men get angry, women get angry. If you know anything about anger, and not even like intellectually or academically, just purely experientially about anger, when it bubbles up within you, it emerges when expectations are violated. To demonize anger is to silence information that your emotions aren't inherently bad. They are a signal. And the issue, in my opinion, is not that anger exists, but that it is increasingly and consistently misinterpreted, untranslated, and uncontained. When anger is denied a linguistic outlet, it doesn't actually disappear. I think it mutates.
Now, in the case of me expressing anger and her expressing sadness, she's crying and I'm yelling. Suddenly, I become a villain.
It's so interesting. I saw a viral tweet yesterday. It was someone Googling, "My wife is yelling at me, what should I do?" And then "My husband is yelling at me, what should I do?" When they Googled "My husband is yelling at me, what should I do?" domestic violence helpline comes up as like a Google pop-up. When you Google "My wife is yelling at me, what should I do?" nothing comes up.
Yeah.
Because obviously, as you said, in the case of villainization, I know that most domestic violence comes from men, but it's interesting that we see the emotion, we interpret the emotions entirely differently because of that.
Absolutely, right? So we as a society will say like, oh, men need to be in touch with their emotions, but not anger. And then this is what really screws men, because as men, we are socialized and conditioned to only feel anger. This is the only emotion you're allowed to feel as a man growing up. And this is the one emotion that gets demonized when you're older. So I'll give you a simple example. So like I used to get bullied a lot, right? So when I get bullied in school, like what am I supposed to do, Stephen?
In school, well, it depends if you can fight back.
I actually don't believe that most men can articulate relational dissatisfaction. I'm talking severe relational dissatisfaction in the presence of women, not because all those women are malicious, but because the interpretive frame is fundamentally broken. The war is perception, and what we are perceiving in the opposite gender's expression of certain emotions is not always the same thing. For example, when a man gets angry or when a woman responds to such anger with tears, we don't see that as the same thing. I've seen several extremes to the perception of certain emotions, and I'm pretty sure that some of you guys can definitely testify to this. I mean, just the whole crying thing, Now, in intimate arguments, that is when I am having a tense conversation with someone I'm very, very close to. This is a different type of environment. I am prone to crying. I'm not even gonna lie. Like if you raise your voice at me, I do. Like I can't help it. But I noticed that a lot of men interpret that as a manipulative tactic to guilt you into you apologizing for whatever the conflict happened to be. And in my case, and I find it, and I mean in a lot of women's cases, it's really not what that is. But yes, there are women who cry in order to manipulate, in order to force sympathy, in order to get out of an uncomfortable situation where they have to take accountability, So yes, and then also with anger, when a man experiences anger, it's not always that he's trying to kill you. Sometimes he's passionate, sometimes he is expressive. But again, I'm making those examples. I'm conscientizing you to my experiences of those, those emotions, because you guys, we're not perceiving each other's expressions of emotion the same way. Two things happen here almost automatically. Anger is read as a threat rather than a signal, and expression is conflated with intent. The result is not silence, rather it is segregation. We find that men retreat into male-only spaces where grievances are mirrored rather than actually interrogated with, picked apart for their validity. I am more concerned with men not knowing what to do with their grievance or expressing their grievance in healthy ways because of immaturity than the general expression of grievance, dissatisfaction, or anger, you know. I don't think it's helpful, to be honest with you, to demonize anger, to demonize valid human emotions. What I believe we often see is that unregulated or immature anger seeks simpler containers for that grievance. Okay, women did this, society did this, my parents did this, my trauma did this. It's you know what I mean. Conspiracy thrives where articulation fails. And this is why I believe that declining birth rates, male friendlessness or loneliness epidemics, and sexual resentment are framed in apocalyptic terms. They are real phenomena being processed with insufficient cognitive tools. And not because those tools are inherently unintelligent, but because those tools or the people using those tools are immature. We are facing simultaneously a maturity crisis, an addiction crisis, and a teleology crisis. And none of them can be solved without resolving the issue of language and literacy, I think. Maturity, historically and even biblically, has never been defined by productivity, by impulse, or by dominance alone. It's actually defined through restraint, delayed gratification, and you know, the capacity to shoulder responsibility without immediate reward. And yet now you'll have to wait for part 2 because I don't know how this video is going to go over, and I had a lot of notes. I recorded too much footage. I talked too much. You guys, I could not help myself. I'm sorry, but I will see you very, very soon in part 2.